Hey everyone, back with another polars tutorial. Hope you're all doing real well. Today we're going to be talking about the .any and .all methods in polars. Now this is one of the more, I wouldn't say obscure methods, but not any methods that you're going to see covered in a lot of the literature that you're going to read on polars, on any books or any articles you commonly find. They're usually going to cover other data manipulation operations beforehand, but you will see this in other people's code as well as in a lot of code on a lot of the websites that offer tutorials like Stack Overflow and whatnot. And so they definitely have their use cases. And so I'll go over a brief introduction of these. And so the first one we're going to talk about is the .any method. And what the .any method is going to do is it's going to test if any value in a single column is true. And so in other words, if any of the values in this single column is a Boolean of true, then the value that's going to be returned from the any method is going to evaluate to true. Now, one thing that's important to note about this is that for this method to work, it does require a Boolean value in here, which kind of presents a challenge, right? Because most of the time in data sets that we're working with, we're not working with Boolean columns, we're working with integers, we're working with floats, strings, dates, and date times and whatnot. It's very rare that our data on input is going to be Boolean, so we'll show some ways to actually kind of make this a little bit more usable. Oftentimes that means pairing this with a logical test of some kind. And so then there's horizontal variants of these methods. So there's any horizontal, and anything with an underscore horizontal syntax to it means that it's going to be a row-based operation. And so in other words, what any horizontal allows us to do is it allows us to test if any value in a collection of columns within a single case is true. So if any, let's say we want to test whether or not test1, test2, and test3, whether or not any of these values within a case is true, then for that row, if any of these are true, it'll return a value of true. If not, it'll return a value of false. And then there's all, and all is basically the flip side of any. What all is going to do if it's going to test if all the values in a single column are true. So if each and every one of these values in this first test1 column is true, it's going to return a value of true as well. And then there's all horizontal, and that does exactly what you might expect it to do. It's going to test if all the values within a single case are true. So if each of these are true for this first case here, it's going to return a value of true. And if any of them are false, if any one of them is false, it'll return a value of false. Because again, they all have to be true for that all method to evaluate to true. So if that sounds a little bit schematic, we'll go over just some practical cases here using this input data. So the first we'll go over the .any method. And so I'm creating a new data set here with out of our input data. I'm just calling it any example. And so we start out by pointing to the input data set, which is just called demo. And then we do .with columns because we want to add columns to this data frame. And so I'm going to create a new variable. And this variable is going to be a test variable, and we're testing if any value in the test1 column is above 90. So if any of these values in this column is above 90, we're going to return a value of true. And so again, in order for this to work, we have to transform these values into Booleans. And so the way we do that is we just pair it with or we pass it into a logical operator of some kind, or a logical test method of some kind. So I start out by pointing to the column, so pl call test1, and then we pass that to the greater than method. And so we're going to test if it's greater than 90. And so at that point, all of these should evaluate to true or false. And then we can do .any, and that'll test if any of these values are true. And so then we'll test if individual students had a test score greater than 90 across 3 tests. So if any of these test scores within an individual student are greater than 90, then we'll return a value of true. So this one right here should get a value of true, so should these, because they are above, because they have at least one test score greater than 90. If they don't have a test score greater than 90, we want a value of false. And so the syntax for this is a little bit different. We don't write the any method, any horizontal method at the end, similar to what we did with .any. What we do is we start out by just writing in pl.any horizontal, and then within parenthesis, we pass in our Boolean columns. And so we do pl call test1, test2, test3, and then we pass these to the .gt 90 method, or dot greater than method, and we pass in a value of 90 to test if each of these are greater than 90. And if each of these ones are greater, if any of these are greater than 90, then it's going to return a value of true, otherwise false. So we'll go ahead and just run these and take a look at the results. Okay, so there we go. The first variable we created, test 190, where we tested if any of these values in this first column here are greater than 90. That returned a value of true for every single case. And the reason it's going to return a value of true is because there were a couple values here, or at least one value that was greater than 90, so that returned a value of true. And the second variable we created here, where we tested if any of these values across 3 tests for a given student were greater than 90. Some of these evaluated to false, and the reason these evaluated to false is because there was not a value in here that was greater than 90. The ones that evaluated to true, those evaluated to true because there was at least one value that was greater than 90 on some of these, or on these particular cases. Okay, so that's really all there is to the any method. I like using the any method, or I haven't found myself using the any method that often, but I do find myself using the any horizontal method. It's a really good alternative to writing a long series of or statements, right? So if we wanted to do a test for this using like pl when, for example, we would probably do like pl when pl call test 1 greater than 90, or pl call test 2 greater than 90, or pl call test 3 greater than 90. So the any horizontal method really saves us some time here. And I have very similar sentiments with the all method that we'll talk about real quick. So all syntactically is exactly the same, if not completely identical to any. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new data set, all example, and we'll set that equal to the input data set. And we're going to add columns. We're going to use with columns. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to test if all of the values in the test 1 column are above 60. So in other words, if all of these are above 60. So if all these received a passing grade, and we should get a value of false because we do see a value here that's less than 60. And so the syntax to do that, it's just pl.call and then the column that you're interested in. And then again, we have to transform these into Booleans. We're going to pass that to the greater than method, and we're going to test if it's greater than 60. And then we just pass that to all. And again, we're testing if they're all true. And then to test within a single case, we're going to test if individual students had a test score greater than 90 across 3 tests. Or, I'm sorry, greater than 60. Whoops, it's a typo. So in other words, if they were all a passing grade. And so the way we do that is we just type in pl.allHorizontal, and then we pass in the columns that we're interested in. So we're going to do pl call test 1 through test 3, and we're going to pass that to the greater than method, and we're going to test if these 3 columns are greater than 60. And if they're all greater than 60, then we should get a value of true from this all horizontal test. Otherwise, it should be false. So we'll go ahead and run this guy too and take a look at the results. All right, so our first column here, all GT60, where we tested if all the values in this first column here are greater than 60, it evaluated to false, and that's because there was a singular value here that was less than 60. And the all horizontal 60, where we tested for each of these individual cases whether they were whether all their test scores were greater than 60. We see that much of them evaluated to true, and those cases where it was true, that's because there were cases that were greater than 60, that they all had a score greater than 60 here, and the ones that were false had at least one score that was less than 60. Okay, guys, so that's all there is to the all method. Now, I like using the all, again, I don't find myself using the all method that often, but I do find myself using all horizontal quite a bit because similar to any horizontal, all horizontal you can use to kind of get rid of a lot of repetitive and tests. So if you were using like pl when or something like that to create a flag out of this, this would be like pl when, pl.when, pl call, test 1 greater than 60, and pl PL call test2 greater than 60, and so on and so forth. So again, this is one of those things that saves you a lot of code. So that's all there is to the .any and .all methods, guys. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you again soon.